Come back to me. That was what my husband wrote on a sticky note the morning of my last deployment. He pressed it onto the bathroom mirror so I'd see it when I brushed my teeth at 4 a.m. His handwriting was uneven, rushed, like a man who meant it so deeply he couldn't slow down enough to make it neat. I peeled it off the glass and folded it into the breast pocket of my uniform, right next to my dog tags. I carried it for 8 months in a combat zone. I carried it through sand and heat, and classified briefings that would never appear in any public record. I carried it the way you carry something you believe in without checking, without doubting, because the weight of it is enough. 8 months later, I came back. I walked through the front door of my own house at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday with 40 pounds of gear on my back and 12 days of accumulated desert sand still embedded in the stitching of my boots, and the first thing I saw was 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. Both used, both still holding a dark red film at the bottom, a woman's cashmere coat draped over the armchair, a meal in the kitchen that smelled like garlic and something braised, the kind of meal that takes 2 hours, the kind Marcus always said was too complicated to make for me. My sister Diana wears a size 4. The coat on my armchair was a size 4. Marcus came around the corner tucking in his shirt. He saw me standing in the entryway. He stopped moving. And the first words out of his mouth, the first words my husband of 12 years said to the woman who had just spent 8 months processing war crimes in a combat zone, the woman who had carried his handwriting against her chest every single day, were not, "I missed you. We're not your home. We're not even my name." He looked at me and he said, "You were supposed to be gone for another 3 weeks. Not relief, not guilt, not the basic human reflex of a man caught doing something unforgivable. Logistics. He gave me logistics, like I was a scheduling conflict, like I was a meeting that had been moved without proper notice." Diana appeared behind him 30 seconds later wearing his flannel shirt. Sleeves rolled to the elbows the way you roll sleeves when something belongs to you. She looked at me, her mouth opened, closed. And what came out of my younger sister's mouth? The woman who sent me care packages every deployment, who stood at my commissioning ceremony and cried real tears and told our father that I was the strongest person she had ever met, was this. "Rebecca, this isn't what it looks like." And Marcus, standing behind her, said nothing. He looked at the floor, he looked at his hands, he looked everywhere except at me, because he already knew. He had known for 8 months and kept cashing my direct deposits every 2 weeks like clockwork, while I was sleeping in a reinforced container in a hostile zone, trusting him with everything I had built. I set my tactical bag down on the tile, slowly, with both hands. I looked at my sister, I looked at my husband. I said 3 words. "Get out, both." My voice was so quiet that Marcus actually leaned forward as though he hadn't heard correctly. He had heard correctly. I held the door open. I watched them gather their things with the clinical detachment of a woman who has spent 14 years watching guilty people understand that the walls have closed. Diana grabbed her coat without looking at me. Marcus paused at the door. 1 second. I thought he was going to say something real. Something that acknowledged what he had just done to our life. He said, "We should talk about this when you're not so emotional." I closed the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over both wrists for 60 seconds. Then I opened the cabinet underneath, retrieved a pair of latex evidence gloves from the box I kept for casework, pulled them onto my hands, and walked back into the living room. Because I was a JAG prosecutor before I was ever his wife. And all of this was now a crime scene. I need you to understand something about who I am before I tell you what I found that night, because what comes next only makes sense if you understand the distance between what Marcus thought I was and what I actually was. He thought he had married a woman who wore a uniform and did paperwork and came home tired and grateful. He thought my career was a long series of administrative inconveniences that kept interrupting his life. He introduced me at dinner parties as my wife. She's in the army. He does legal stuff and watched people nod politely and move on. And he never once corrected them when they assumed legal stuff meant filing documents in a basement office on a military base somewhere flat and unimportant. He did not know that in 2019, I built the prosecution case that put 6 defense contractors in federal prison for defrauding the United States government of $340 million. He did not know that the case took 22 months, involved 47 witnesses across 4 countries, and required me to reconstruct a financial fraud network that the contractors had spent a decade burying inside shell corporations and falsified compliance reports. He did not know that my commanding officer at the time, Colonel James Whitfield, the Judge Advocate General of the entire United States Army, wrote in my performance review that I had the most precise legal mind he had encountered in 30 years of military law. He did not know that my call sign was Echo because I could reconstruct testimony, financial records, and evidence chains from memory with the accuracy of a recording device. No notes. No second pass. One exposure, and it was filed permanently. He thought I did legal stuff. He had no idea what was about to happen to him. My father gave me his military watch the day I was commissioned. It was a heavy steel field chronograph scratched on the bezel, worn on the band, accurate to within 3 seconds per month. He had worn it through 2 tours in Vietnam. He pressed it into my palm at the commissioning ceremony and said, "This runs on discipline, not batteries. So do you." I wore it every single day of my service career, every deployment, every trial. Every morning I strapped it to my left wrist before I touched a single case file, because it reminded me who I was before any title, any rank, any credential. I was the daughter of a man who believed that showing up, every day, without excuses, was the highest form of honor a person could demonstrate. Marcus took it off my wrist 9 months before my last deployment. We were getting ready for a dinner with his investment partners. He reached over without asking, unclasped the band, and set it on the nightstand. "It makes you look like you're still playing soldier," he said. "Tonight you're my wife." I let him take it. I set it in the nightstand drawer, and I went to dinner, and I smiled at his partners, and I shook their hands, and I said nothing about Kandahar or the Meridian Defense Prosecution, or the 23 people currently serving federal sentences because of briefs I wrote. I was his wife. I played the part, and the next morning I shipped out without putting the watch back on, because somewhere in that drawer and that dinner and that sentence, I had allowed him to make me believe that the watch was a costume and not a covenant. That was the only battle I ever lost to Marcus. And I lost it by choosing not to fight. The night I came home to the 2 wine glasses and the cashmere coat, I pulled the watch out of the nightstand drawer while the latex gloves were still on my hands. I set it on the kitchen table next to my legal pad. I did not put it on. Not yet. I had work to do first. I called the bank at 8 a.m. the next morning. I requested a complete transaction history for our joint account going back 12 months. The representative read me the balance. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Then I asked her to read me every withdrawal over $500, in chronological order, from the date of my last deployment. 34 transactions. $127,000. Gone. The largest single withdrawal was $43,000, pulled 3 days after I boarded the transport. The account that had taken both of us 9 years to build. The account I had funded through 6 deployments, through 12-hour shifts in combat legal offices, through missed Christmases and missed anniversaries and missed everything that civilians take for granted as the basic texture of a life stripped in 8 months while I was trusting him to hold it. I wrote every number down in my legal pad, column by column, date, amount, running total. I circled the running total at the bottom. Then I pulled my father's property records, and I found what I had been dreading since the moment I walked into that living room and understood, on a level below language, that something was catastrophically wrong. The house my father left me was gone. He had died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to burial. He left me the house, a 3-bedroom Craftsman in Concord, that he had owned outright since 1987. The house where I grew up, the house where he sat at the kitchen table every morning, drinking black coffee and reading the newspaper and telling me that the most dangerous thing a person could be in this world was mediocre. He left it to me in a will that his attorney filed with the county clerk the same week he was diagnosed, because he was a man who believed in completing the paperwork before the deadline. The deed transfer was dated 5 months ago. The sale price was $380,000. The signature on the seller line read, Rebecca M. Calloway. I set the document down on the table. I picked it up again. I looked at the signature. I looked at it for a long time, with the trained attention of someone who has spent 14 years examining documents for authenticity. I have looked at hundreds of forged signatures in my career. I know what forgery looks like. The slight hesitation at the start of a letter, the inconsistency in pen pressure, the way a person trying to replicate someone else's handwriting unconsciously slows down and produces something that looks like the signature, but moves like a copy. This was a copy. It had my name. It did not have my hand. I opened the top drawer of my kitchen desk and removed the folder where I kept personal documents, passport, insurance, car title. I found a check I had signed before deployment. I placed it next to the deed. I looked at both signatures under the kitchen light for 4 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called the FBI field office in Charlotte. I did not call a lawyer first. I did not call a friend. I did not sit with the grief of what I was holding in my hands, the house where my father taught me to read, sold without my knowledge. The signature of a dead man's daughter forged onto a contract for $380,000 in cash that went directly into an account I had no access to. I made the call because I was a JAG prosecutor, and this was what JAG prosecutors do. We document, we report, we build. The agent who answered asked me to describe the nature of my complaint. I said, forged signature on a real property transfer, unauthorized withdrawal of joint marital funds, and I believe there are additional fraudulent loan applications using my military credentials as a guarantee. I have documentation for all 3. I'd like to bring it in today. There was a pause on the line. She said, "Can you come in at 2 o'clock?" I said, "I'll be there at 1. I hung up the phone. I looked at the legal pad on the table. $127,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. $380,000 from the sale of my father's house. A forged signature with my name on it. I picked up my pen and added a 3rd column to the page. Potential additional exposure loan applications. I left the number blank because I didn't have it yet. I would have it soon. I picked up my father's watch from the table. I turned it over in my gloved hands. The back was engraved his name, his service dates, the single word he had added himself with a jeweler's tool the year he came home from Vietnam. Endure. I set it back down. Not yet. There was still work to do before I earned the right to put it back on. 3 weeks later, Marcus sent me an email. The subject line was, "Important, please attend." He was hosting a promotion event at the Meridian Capital offices on Trade Street. 80 guests, cocktails and champagne. A celebration of a new partnership he had spent 6 months building a $4.2 million advisory contract that was supposed to make him untouchable. He had included my name on the guest list. In parentheses, next to my name, he had typed the word closure. He used my name as a guest list item. He typed closure, like it was a task he needed to complete. Like 12 years and a forged deed and $127,000 could be resolved over cocktails in a room full of his investors. I read the email twice. I closed my laptop. I sat at my kitchen table for 11 minutes. Then I opened a drawer, removed a fresh legal pad, and began a new column. I was going to that party, not for closure. For the same reason I had walked into every courtroom for 14 years, because I had the evidence, I had the timeline, and the only thing left was the right audience at the right moment. What I did not know yet, what I could not have planned, was that the most important man in that room was already going to be on my side before I walked through the door. Colonel James Whitfield, retired Judge Advocate General of the United States Army, the man who had supervised the Meridian defense prosecution, the man who wrote in my performance review that I had the most precise legal mind he had encountered in 30 years. He was now the senior legal advisor for Meridian Capital, the same Meridian Capital whose $4.2 million contract Marcus had spent 6 months pursuing. The same contract that was the entire reason for this party. The reason for the champagne and the tailored suits and the 80 guests and the word closure in parentheses next to my name. Marcus had been trying for 6 months to close a deal with my former commanding officer. He had no idea. I dressed carefully the night of the party. No uniform. I had thought about it, the dress blues, the ribbon rack, the silver oak leaves on the collar, and I decided against it, not because I was hiding anything, because I didn't need it. The uniform is an announcement. I didn't want to announce. I wanted to arrive. I wore a dark blazer, charcoal gray slacks, the field watch on my left wrist, my father's watch, back on my wrist for the first time since the nightstand drawer, back where it had always belonged. I checked the time in the mirror before I left. Exactly on schedule. It always was. The Meridian Capital offices were on the 14th floor of a glass building on Trade Street. I took the elevator up alone. The doors opened into a room that smelled like money, specific money, the kind that comes with catered appetizers and soft lighting and people who have learned to hold a glass without looking like they're thinking about the price. I scanned the room the way I scan every room. Exits, sightlines, power positions. Marcus was near the window with a group of men in dark suits, laughing at something with the practiced ease of a man performing confidence. Diana was beside him, in a dress I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his forearm, her posture arranged to suggest she belonged there. Whitfield was at the bar. I recognized him immediately. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe it was the civilian clothes, the absence of rank insignia that always compresses people somehow. He was holding a glass of water, not champagne, watching the room with the particular stillness of a man who has spent decades in courtrooms and learned that the most useful thing you can do in any room is observe before you engage. I did not approach him. I took a glass from a passing tray and moved to a position where I could see Marcus clearly. I waited. It took Marcus 11 minutes to notice me. I watched him clock my presence from across the room, the slight stiffening of his posture, the fractional pause in his laugh, the quick assessment of my clothing that ended at my wrist and the watch he had taken off me and put in a drawer. His jaw set. He said something quietly to Diana. She looked up and found me. Her expression moved through 3 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, guilt, and then something that settled into a careful neutrality that she had clearly been practicing. Marcus excused himself from the group and crossed the room toward me, with the measured pace of a man choosing his strategy mid-approach. Rebecca. He said my name, the way you say the name of something you're trying to control. I'm glad you came. This is important for both of us. I know, I said. He studied my face, looking for the emotion he expected, anger, or grief, or the fragile composure of a woman barely holding herself together. He found nothing. That bothered him more than anything else would have. He steered me toward the group near the window. Whitfield had moved from the bar and was standing at the edge of that group, his water glass still in his hand. Marcus placed his palm briefly on my elbow, the possessive guiding touch of a man demonstrating familiarity, and said, loudly enough for the group to hear, "Everyone, this is Rebecca, my ex-wife. She did administrative work in the army for a while. 14 years very dedicated to the paperwork." Polite laughter. A couple of nods. Someone made a brief eye contact with me and looked away. Diana stood 3 feet behind Marcus with a small controlled smile. The smile of someone watching a plan execute correctly. Administrative work. 14 years of paperwork. I had a man serving 9 years in federal prison because of my paperwork. I had reconstructed a $340 million fraud network from memory without a single note. I had stood in front of a federal judge for 6 weeks and dismantled a legal defense team of 11 attorneys, one cross-examination at a time. I had done all of this while Marcus was at dinner parties telling people I did legal stuff. I smiled. I said nothing. Because I had spent 14 years learning that silence is not weakness. Silence is the space you hold open for the truth to walk into on its own. Whitfield set his water glass down on the table beside him. He turned and looked at me directly. Not the polite peripheral attention of a man at a party, the full, focused attention of someone processing information. His eyes moved from my face to my left wrist, to the watch. He looked at the watch for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked back at my face. I saw the moment he placed me. "Calloway," he said. Not a question. A confirmation. LTC Rebecca Calloway. JAG Corps, Fort Bragg. The group went quiet. Marcus's smile held its position on his face but lost all the musculature behind it, the specific collapse of an expression that has stopped being connected to anything real. "Sir," I said. Whitfield stepped forward. He extended his hand to me, directly to me, before acknowledging anyone else at the table, before looking at Marcus, before any of the social choreography that normally governs those moments. He shook my hand with both of his. "The way you shake the hand of someone whose work you have not forgotten." "Meridian Defense, 2019, he said. "You prosecuted that case for 22 months. You put 6 of my former contractors in federal prison and saved this company $340 million in liability exposure. The Army owes you considerably more than a dinner." He said it clearly. He said it in a room of 80 people with impeccable acoustics and no background music, and every person within 12 feet heard every word. The silence that followed had a texture. It pressed against the walls. Marcus opened his mouth. No sound came out. He closed it. He was doing the mathematics in real time, and the numbers were not resolving in any direction that helped him. His ex-wife, who did administrative work, had just been identified by his most important business partner as the prosecutor, who saved that partner's company from a 9-figure liability. In front of 80 guests. At a party Marcus had organized, in a room Marcus had rented, with champagne Marcus had chosen. Diana set her glass down on the tray of a passing server. Her hand was not steady. Whitfield turned to me and said, quietly, "Can I speak with you for a moment?" We moved to the small balcony off the main room. The city spread below us, The grid of Charlotte lit up against the November dark. Whitfield closed the glass door behind us. He looked at me with the direct, unapologetic attention of a man who has spent a career cutting through everything that isn't relevant. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need to know if you're aware of it." He told me that in the past 8 months, Meridian Capital's compliance team had received 3 credit applications, each listing Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca M. Calloway, JAG Corps, Fort Bragg, as the primary guarantor. The combined value of the 3 applications was $890,000. The signatures on each application had been flagged by Meridian's document verification system as inconsistent with the signature on file from my 2019 prosecution materials. All 3 applications had been declined. All 3 files had been retained. "We were going to report it," he said. "We hadn't identified the applicant with certainty until tonight." I looked out at the city for a moment. 8 months, 3 applications, $890,000 attempted, $127,000 completed, $380,000 from my father's house, a forged signature with my name on it on 3 loan documents I had never seen and a property deed I had never signed. They had used my rank, my record, my 14 years, my father's house, the credential I had built one case at a time, in some of the most legally complex environments, and the military prosecutes. They had taken all of it and tried to borrow almost $1 million against it while I was sleeping in a combat zone, trusting them with my life. "I'm aware," I said. "I reported it to the FBI 3 weeks ago. The case is open." Whitfield nodded once. He picked up his water glass from the balcony railing. "Then you don't need anything from me." "No," I said. "But thank you for telling me." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, the look of a senior officer, acknowledging something that doesn't require more words than it has already been given. Then he opened the glass door and walked back into the party. I stayed on the balcony for 90 seconds. The city below me didn't care about any of this. It kept moving. Lights changed. Cars turned. People walked from one place to another, carrying whatever they were carrying. I looked at my father's watch. The second hand moved without hesitation, without drama, without any awareness of what the previous hour had contained. It just kept running, like it always had. I went back inside. Whitfield was standing at the center of the room. Marcus had positioned himself close, the way you position yourself near the person you most need, and he was speaking quickly, his voice low and controlled, wearing the expression of a man managing a situation he believes is still manageable. Whitfield was listening with his hands in his pockets, and his weight evenly distributed, the posture of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the appropriate moment to deliver it. He waited until Marcus stopped talking. Then he said, in a voice calibrated to carry exactly as far as the edges of the room, "Marcus, I'm withdrawing Meridian from the partnership discussion. Effective tonight. $4.2 million. Gone in one sentence. 6 months of meetings and proposals and champagne and 80 guests and the word closure in parentheses next to my name, all of it. Gone in the time it takes to say 17 words." Marcus went very still. The kind of still that happens when every contingency a person has prepared collapses simultaneously, and there is nothing left to grab onto. Then he did the thing that ended whatever remained of his credibility in that room. He pointed at me. His voice came out unsteady, too loud for the room, stripped of the performance polish he had spent years applying. "This is her doing this. She's nobody. She's just a soldier. She doesn't have anything to do with this deal." The room was silent. 80 people in tailored suits holding expensive glasses, and not one of them moved. Whitfield looked at Marcus for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was entirely level. "She prosecuted the case that saved this company $340 million in liability. She has everything to do with every deal I make." He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair. He nodded to me once across the room. He walked to the elevator. The doors opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. Marcus stood in the center of the room he had rented with the champagne he had chosen, surrounded by the 80 people he had invited, and the silence around him had the specific quality of a verdict that has just been read aloud and cannot be appealed. Diana was already at the elevator. She pressed the button 4 times quickly, the way people press elevator buttons when they understand that staying in the room is no longer possible. I did not smile. I did not say anything to Marcus. I did not give him the confrontation he could have used to reframe the evening as a misunderstanding, a dispute between difficult people, a situation more complex than it appeared. I gave him nothing. I collected my coat from the coat check. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button once. The doors opened. I stepped in. As the doors closed, I caught one last image of the room, Marcus standing exactly where I had left him, the champagne glasses and the soft lighting and the catered appetizers, arranged around him like the set of a play that had just lost its audience. The elevator descended. I looked at my father's watch. 9:14 p.m. Right on schedule. 11 days later, 2 federal agents arrived at Marcus's office building on a Tuesday morning. He was arrested in the lobby before he reached the elevator. The charges were bank fraud, forgery of legal documents, and unauthorized use of military credentials in financial applications. Diana was taken in for questioning the same afternoon. She was charged as a co-conspirator in the property deed forgery. The bail hearing was public record. I did not attend. The total financial exposure the FBI documented was $1.38 million across all fraudulent activity: the account withdrawals, the property sale, the attempted loan applications. The amount Marcus had actually taken, $507,000. The amount he had attempted to take using my name, $890,000 more. The investigation also surfaced 2 additional fraudulent business transactions unrelated to me that added separate charges. By the time the full indictment was filed, Marcus faced 12 counts. 12. The company he had built on the salary I deposited into our joint account every month for 12 years entered financial review within 60 days of the arrest. His professional licenses were suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. 3 of his investment partners issued public statements distancing themselves from his firm. The Meridian Capital Partnership was never discussed again. Diana hired a separate attorney. She stopped responding to calls from anyone in the family. Our mother called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail, not out of cruelty. Out of the same clarity I bring to every case. I close once the evidence is filed and the charges are entered, and the machinery of consequence is in motion. The prosecutor steps back. The case runs itself. That is the point of building it correctly. I sat at my desk at Fort Bragg JAG office the morning after the indictment was filed. The room was quiet. The fluorescent light hummed above the desk the same way it always did. I had a new case file open in front of me, a financial misconduct investigation involving a supply procurement officer at Fort Liberty, 38 pages of falsified receipts going back 18 months. I had read it twice already and I could have recited it from memory if anyone had asked. I opened my top desk drawer. Inside, underneath the spare legal pads and the box of evidence markers, was a folded piece of paper, the sticky note from the bathroom mirror. Come back to me. The handwriting uneven and rushed, like a man who meant it so deeply he couldn't slow down enough to make it neat. I held it for a moment. Not long. Long enough to acknowledge what it had been and what it had turned out to mean, not a promise but a disposal notice. The last piece of useful information a man had given me before he spent 8 months dismantling everything I had left in his care. I folded it in half. I placed it in the small metal wastebasket beside my desk. I didn't feel the need to do anything more dramatic than that. Drama is for people who aren't sure of what they've decided. I was sure. I closed the new case file. I picked up my pen. I began at the beginning, the way I always begin with the evidence, column by column, date by date, building toward the truth with the same methodical patience my father built into me, long before the army ever got the chance to refine it. On my left wrist, the field watch ran without hesitation. The second hand moved in its steady, unimpressed circle, indifferent to everything except the next second, and the one after that, and the one after that. My father told me it ran on discipline, not batteries. He was right about that. He was right about most things. Marcus told people I was nobody without a uniform. He was wrong about the uniform and he was wrong about nobody. The uniform was never what made me dangerous. What made me dangerous was 14 years of learning exactly how to take apart the financial architecture of people who believed that what they had stolen was too well hidden to find. What made me dangerous was a memory that didn't need notes. What made me dangerous was a father who pressed a watch into my hand on the day I was commissioned, and told me that the most dangerous thing a person could be in this world was mediocre and a lifetime of proving him right, one case at a time. They had 8 months, and my name and my rank and my father's house and my money, they used all of it. And it still wasn't enough. Because the one thing they forgot, the single variable that broke every calculation they had made, was that I was going to come home. I always come home. And I always start with the evidence. If you know what it feels like to trust someone completely, and watch them use that trust against you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, after someone took everything, share this story with someone who needs to hear that the truth always comes out, and the people who built themselves on your name always fall when you finally decide to take it back. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, if you were sitting on that evidence, would you have walked away quietly, or done exactly what she did? I read every single one.